Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. And at this time of year, it's only natural that we should look back and take stock and make sure the things that work really well this year get carried forward, and perhaps those things that weren't so successful are not repeated. And on top of that, there's still lots to do to make sure that the garden is looking at its very best next spring. As well as looking back over the successes and failures of my dual garden, I'm also planting tulips for the first big splash of colour next spring, and gathering up my favourite autumn harvest, fallen leaves. Collect them up now and you'll have a superb soil conditioner next year, which money literally can't buy. Carol is at Glebe Cottage, with tips on how to train and prune an unruly rambling rose.
All that growth has been made this year, and that's the growth which will flower next summer.
And Jo is at the Alnwick Garden in Northumberland, where the superb underlying structure guarantees that it looks spectacular all the year round.
Now, this is gardening on a grand scale, but it's not grand gardening, and that's what I like about it. There's something for everybody here.
Now, I say that I'm going to review the dual garden, but of course it's still going strong. It's still pouring out flowers into the autumn days. It has evolved across the year, and you have to remember that in March this was a blank canvas, because the dual garden had become very dominated by a few thuggish plants, and also, more critically, overwhelmed with bindweed. And the only way to deal with that was to take everything out, which in itself was a big job, and then dig through inch by inch, removing every scrap of bindweed root. And on the whole, that's been a success. But we've had to replant. So to think that all this has been achieved in 6 months is something that makes me very pleased. One of the heroes has been sweet peas, but their day is done. They really can't be expected to go on anymore, so I need to remove these to create a bit of space, so then I can start thinking about bulbs for next spring. This is Kupani, and there are no seeds on at all because we kept picking the flowers. But I'll just cut that off, and this will all end up as compost. One of the strange things about this year, and it has been quite a strange year in many ways, is what has done well and what hasn't done so well here in the dual garden. For example, the Mexican and South American tender annuals, like these zinnias, which have just been incredible all summer, and the Salvia garanitica, the cosmos and tithonia, have all really been superb. Couldn't have asked for more. But a plant that I always grow with this bunch, and which to me is a key dual garden plant, the Leonotis leonoris, which comes from South Africa, has done nothing. Completely hopeless. I've dotted them around, none of them have got more than about a foot tall, and they should be right up there with the salvia, with those lovely orange flowers. And all I can guess is that it didn't have heat at a crucial time. It's not just the quantity of heat that matters, it's the timing. And July and August were really cold here. And these plants were able just to sort of weather that storm, and then when it got warmer in September, they came into their own, by which time it was too late for Leonotis. Take these out. Another thing which I've noticed this year is that when we planted the shrubs in the dual garden, in my mind, they were fairly substantial structural elements in the borders. But of course, we put them in really small, and they've stayed small. They haven't thrived at all. That's partly because it was cold, but also because the perennials and the annuals all around them have swamped them. And the whole idea in the dual garden is let things spread, let things ramble, let things grow really strongly within a tight structure. And Jo has been to Northumberland, to a garden where structure is taken to another level, where it's used in a dramatic way right the way through the year.
Alnwick is all about design on a grand scale, and what sets it apart from other historic gardens is it's 100% contemporary. Now it's got permanent structures throughout the garden holding it together, such as this wonderful hornbeam walkway. Now it's the proportions that are impressive. It's so tall and so wide it lets the light through, and from outside it's got that lovely dome top, and this green architecture is a hallmark of Alnwick Gardens. This is the ornamental garden, and it's one of the most exciting spaces here at Alnwick. It's packed full of plants with some great combinations. It's set within a very traditional walled garden, but what's interesting is everything here has a modern twist.
There's a strong geometrical layout combining squares, rectangles, circles and triangles to form a structured framework. Yew buttresses planted against the old brick walls are a really nice touch, adding a simple rhythm and a sense of solidity to the space.
What really excites me about this garden is that at first you look at it and it feels so familiar, but then you look a little bit deeper and the plants that are used here are really quite unexpected. For a start, we've got these wonderful pleached crab apples that are defining this area here. Now, I've never seen crab apples pleached like this, but they're a brilliant choice because they've got great autumn colour, and look at them at the moment, they've just got wonderful fruits all over them. They look absolutely perfect, and precision is key because they're the tallest element in the garden. Then we've got the yew hedges, exactly half the size of the crab apples, and then a cornice hedge, which I've never seen used so formally before, but that's exactly half the size of the yew again. But then within these defined spaces, you take a close look, and again, there's something being reinvented here. We see a traditional rose garden, standard roses, which has normally just got soil underneath, a bit boring, but here it's been planted with blueberries, which creates an understory to the planting, but also, of course, you get blueberries all summer long. But look at them now, fantastic autumn colour, extending the season of interest. So yes, the structure feels pretty familiar, but the plants that have gone into it feel fresh and right up to date. Now, we often introduce water into our own gardens to bring a sense of tranquility and serenity to it. But here in Alnwick, it's a completely different story. It's all about drama, it's about volume, and it's about the wow factor. This grand cascade is quite incredible. It's a modern take on an Italianate classical cascade. It's very sinuous, it's curvaceous in its lines, which echo beautifully in the hornbeam tunnels either side, which have these views through the windows onto it as well. Now, I could be a bit of a design snob here and say, well, it's a little bit chunky, or the finishing isn't that detailed, it's not that refined. But that's not what this is about. It's about fun, it's about interacting with the space, it's about bringing people of all ages to the garden. And for that, it succeeds really well. Either side of the Grand Cascade are two identical areas which use the slope very cleverly. And I think they're my favourite areas because the composition is somehow incredibly pleasing and satisfying, relying on simple elements. The two water features with the rill just connecting them and just running through between the two is brilliant. We've got the fastigiate oaks all the way around the lower pond there, and they give a cathedral-like effect. They're incredibly tall. And then this lovely beech clipped hedge. It's a stylised form of hedge. It's very deep, but as the season turns, it will go lovely rusty brown, and the changes are very subtle in this area. Lots of green and just water. The whole composition is satisfying, it's rewarding, it's balanced. I love it.
The Serpent Garden is all about sinuous curves. Tall yew hedges enclose modern stainless steel water sculptures to enhance a sense of discovery at every turn. This is a really playful part of the garden.
Now, this is gardening on a grand scale, but it's not grand gardening, and that's what I like about it. There's something for everybody here. High-end horticulture, bold design, a wow factor, but it's also fun. Kids love this garden, they're encouraged to run around in it. So the wide appeal and the strong green architecture of this garden makes it accessible all year round.
Now, one part of this garden that changes all the year round is the lime walk. It was one of the very first bits that we made. And then I prune the limes in spring, which delays the growth, and it means that right into May and even June, there's still plenty of light coming into it. And that gives an opportunity to grow spring flowers. And we've always had tulips in here. Now, I love tulips. I love everything about them. They're probably the most voluptuous of all flowers. And also, they bring to spring that first flush of really intense colour. They have a silky vibrancy that almost no other flower has, and certainly no other at that time of year. Now, in fact, here in the Lime Walk, I'm planting white tulips. Now, last year I planted some Nicholas Hayek, which is a new tulip on me, lovely ivory, pale, pale yellow. And some of that will stay in there. But I'm going to top up with white triumphator. And that's a tall, simple tulip with perfect white flowers that last for weeks and weeks. So next year, I get the mixture of the two. Now, tulips aren't cheap. So if you can buy them in bulk, they'll be a lot better value. And what you're looking for, however you get them, is a nice, healthy bulb. Firm, no sign of mould, and looking fresh. And a tip to get them looking reasonably natural is to put the same number in each bay, but don't try and plant them uniformly. Just squeeze them in between the plants. In this case, it's the wallflowers and Alchemilla mollis. Okay, now they're spaced out, and I would do the whole lot. I'd lay them all out on the ground before I planted the first one. Now, there's a big debate about the best way to plant tulips. You can either treat them as annuals, in which case you might as well just bury them under the soil, and they'll do fine and they'll like the topsoil and feed well from it. Or you can treat them as a perennial, coming back year after year. That's tricky. You can only do that if you have really good drainage, if they get a good summer baking, and even then, it doesn't always work. But if you want them to come back year on year, you must plant them deep. And that means at least 4 inches and, if possible, 6 inches under the ground. Now, to do that, a bulb planter is a real help. This is perfect for tulips, the right size. So I take out a plug, and that's the start, but it's not really deep enough. So I want to work that out, get in there, and you can see already it's a bit of a fiddle, and then get them in the ground. And that goes in, and it's covered over. Now that's fine. On sandy soil, not too difficult. But over the years, I've come to the conclusion that it's best to treat tulips as an annual. And if they flower again the following year, that's a bonus. That way you get a really good display every year, and then you can top it up as the years go by. And planting them is dead easy. Simply with a trowel, loosen the soil, pop them in. That's it. And it does mean that you can get a lot in the ground pretty quickly. Now, like all the jobs that we're doing in the garden at this time of year, I shan't see the effects of this for months, but it's guaranteed to make the garden look all the better next spring. And that's exactly what Carol is doing down at Glebe Cottage.
The autumn winds are really beginning to bite now. Some of the branches are already bare. But my raised beds are coming on a treat. I'm quite chuffed with them. I've sown seeds, I've divided plants. I've planted so much down there, but there are still loads of things to do. I took cuttings of this lovely, handsome Lamium ovala way back in April, and now they've made fine, strong plants. And this is going to be their final destination. I think they're going to look just the job in here, alongside this Ophiopogon Planiscarpus nigrescens. It's a member of the lily family, but people call it black grass. And in amongst this other Lamium, this is Lamium maculatum white Nancy. It's flat, it's prostrate, and you needn't take basal cuttings to propagate this. You can just push those little shoots down into the ground gently, and they'll root all the way along the stem. It makes wonderful ground cover and a beautiful backdrop for this Lamium, which is a big, statuesque, strong plant, quite different. Now, they've made absolutely brilliant roots by now, and this is the perfect time to put them in. The soil's lovely and warm, and this soil is so easy to plant into, and those roots will grow out, extend, and by the spring there'll be a whole load of new shoots coming out there, and we should have quite a show even next year. But there's a plant over here in the background which I think is going to make a wonderful backdrop and set the scene for all this. Let me introduce you to Rosa Weilchenblau. I planted this rose maybe 10 or more years ago, and it used to grow along an old fence that was here. Fence fell down, I've re-erected this new one, but unfortunately I neglected the rose, and it did what's in its nature. It's a rambler, and it rambled all over the show with these enormous trusses of violet blue flowers during June and July. It's absolutely beautiful with this fantastic orange scent, and it's the perfect rose to make a backdrop. But if it's going to do that, first I'm going to have to train it. Wiring is the best way, whether you've got a wall or a fence. It's really worth putting in the time to create a firm structure. On a fence like this, I need about 4 wires, about 18 inches apart. I'm using vine eyes threaded with galvanised wire, and at the ends there are eye bolts to create tension. The very first thing you want to do when you're pruning any rose is to identify what it is you want to keep. Then you know what wood you've got to get rid of and take away. Well, in this case, I want 4 big strong shoots on either side to go along horizontally on the wires that I've already put up there. So there's 1, there's 2, and then there are 2 more whoppers over the top, non-flowered shoots. All that growth has been made this year, and that's the growth which will flower next summer. So I want to retain those, and then I want to start by chopping away any really dead old wood down here around the base of the plant. I want to move on so I identify anything that's already flowered, like this, because this is never going to produce more flowers, so I've got to get rid of that completely. Working with roses can be fiddly and a bit hazardous, but Weilchenblau, thankfully, is just about thornless. I'm a bit vertically challenged for doing this. Now, to tie in these new bits, and I'm just using soft twine, and I always tie onto the wire first, do a double knot, and then tie around the stem. Some people use a figure of 8. The whole idea of doing that is to make sure you've got a buffer in between the stem and the wire, so that the stem doesn't get damaged. The whole reason for training horizontally is that all plants head for the sky. They all want to reach upwards, But what we want to do is persuade this plant that it should spend its energy not on making great tall long growth, but on flowering all along its stem. You can take out the tips of these at the beginning of next year if you want to, because that will get it to concentrate even more on producing flower. You know what? It looks pretty good, that. Well, I hope I've given this rose the opportunity to operate at the peak of its performance next year. I'm expecting to see that whole fence dripping with glorious blossom, a perfect backdrop to what I hope is going to be the glory of these new raised beds.
Now this lovely, powdery, sweet-smelling stuff is not compost, but leaf mould. And I always feel that leaf mould is one of the unsung heroes of the garden. We all make compost. We pretty much know how to do it, and we celebrate the fact. But not enough people make leaf mould. For a start, it's really good if you add it to potting compost. And things like bulbs and containers love the loose root run it gives. It makes a very good mulch, particularly for woodland plants. It's a soil improver. It just makes everything grow better because it enables the roots to get down in there and reach in and find all the nutrients. And it's so easy to make, much easier than garden compost. All you have to do is just gather up your leaves and leave them for a year. And I tell you, that was growing on the trees 12 months ago. So obviously the start process is just to collect up leaves. The big mistake is to think of leaves as somehow as litter or waste. It's not. It's so valuable. And raking them up is dead easy, especially when they're dry like this. And there is something rather therapeutic about it too. And I'll tell you another little tip, is get 2 bits of wood, just rough bits of planking, and they make fantastic holders for leaves. Even if you've just got a few leaves, a small garden and not much space, you can still make really good leaf mould in a bin bag. Just a normal black bag like that and put the leaves in it. And then, when it's about 1/4 full, soak them. Give them a real good wetting. Because the leaf mould will make much quicker if the leaves are wet. If you get them wet and keep them wet, that's when they rot down really quickly. Because the fungus loves those wet conditions. So, soak the bottom 1/4, add some more leaves, give it another really good soak, and then about once a month, check it and soak it again if need be. All the leaves should be moist and recognisably wet. Then when it's full and nice and wet, just give it some drainage holes. Because you don't want the leaves to be sitting in a puddle, you just want them to be moist. Now that will drain out. Put it behind a shed, in a corner, and if you want to make leaf mould that you can use as part of your potting compost, it needs to be left for a full year and it's kept wet. On the other hand, if you want to use it as a mulch, and it makes a very good mulch around spring flowering perennials, for example, next March or April, you just take it out of the bag. The leaves will be half decomposed. Spread them on the border, and they work really well. And then the worms will drag them into the soil, and that will improve the quality of the soil as well as suppressing weeds. So that's it. That's all you have to do to make leaf mould. If you have a lot of leaves and plenty of space, then a leaf bay is the way to store them. And the easiest way to make it is with some posts and chicken wire. This is because it lets the air in, and a combination of water and air will make the fungus work much faster. And this will fill up right to the brim. And as it rots down, the space will diminish. So don't worry if it's very full. That will go down to about half its volume. However, there is one more tip that will dramatically reduce the amount of space that your leaves take up. If you can mow your leaves, you'll find that not only does it make it very easy to collect them, but it also chops them up. And this speeds up the decomposition process dramatically. Now, collecting leaves is a job that rolls on for months. But here are some other ideas to think about right through winter. Having gone to the trouble of protecting your greenhouse and bringing in tender plants, check them every day. Remove any dead material and make sure that the plants are healthy. Open the doors and vents if it's mild, and go steady on the watering. In fact, all Mediterranean and South African plants like to be positively dry over winter. If you do have plants you need to water, make sure they can't drip on others that need to be drier. Valuable terracotta pots are easily damaged by cold weather. So before the frosts get too hard, bring them in. Give them a really good scrub to get rid of any lingering pests, virus or disease. Dry them carefully, and then put them in a frost-free place, ready for when you need them next spring. If you've got some empty pieces of ground on your veg plot, it's a good idea to start to dig them now. This can be done steadily across the winter, a little piece at a time. And the main purpose of it is to break up any compaction. Leave the soil roughly dug, and the frost and rain will break it down so that by next spring, it'll be surprisingly easy to prepare. Root vegetables like parsnips and carrots can be left in the ground over winter, but when the soil freezes hard, they can be nigh on impossible to dig up. But by laying down a generous mulch now, you'll help to both insulate the soil and the plant. Well, that's it, not just for tonight's programme, but for this series. Carol, Joe, Rachel and myself will be back for a Christmas special in December, and I'll be back here for a new series at Longmeadow next March. Don't forget that the clocks go back on Sunday morning. There's less time for gardening than ever, but make the most of winter. I'll see you again next spring. Till then, bye-bye.